No one told me it would update while I slept. The edges curled before I touched them. It wasn't paper. Not anymore, though I'd found it folded in a corpse's satchel beneath the sodium monument on Vex Row. When I unwrapped it that first night, it showed only a single path. 5 glyphs spiraling out from a central mark, looping back into themselves. Roads that intersected, but never progressed. That was 12 sleeps ago. Now it shows 57 landmarks. Names I've never spoken, but can somehow pronounce. A canyon carved from hollow memory. A pier that moans. An interpersonal fault line, drawn in pulse-thin ink beneath my old neighborhood. And this morning, a red circle around a house I've never seen, but know I must avoid. It called itself Cartograph OS in the title bar, a pale serif, stitched into the north margin like metadata leaking from a corrupted UI. I don't know how it uploads. I don't know what it's pulling from. But each time I dream, the map changes. And it remembers things I'd rather forget. 2 days ago, it added a note. Your 9th birthday occurred near the spiral intersection. Emotionally volatile. Do not return. It was written in my mother's hand. Today, I stared at a new region labeled Inland Archive of Impossible Conversations. I touched the corner. It pulsed. The voices came next, fractured tones inside my teeth. A recorded apology from someone I haven't lost yet. I bit down and felt the guilt redraw a segment of terrain. I tried burning it. It refused, only folded tighter. Each crease made a new route. One led to the room where I broke a promise and forgot why. Another to the lake that doesn't exist, but I remembered drowning in. The shoreline reappeared on the lower left quadrant when I whispered her name through the static. Last night, I left it outside. I woke and it was beneath my pillow, its corner pressed against the dream where I smelled bone metal and saw my handwriting in a language I do not speak. The key is changing too. It used to be symbols, topographic pulses, color-coded traumas, emotional barometry. Now it includes feelings in parentheses. Reluctant joy, half-known dread, false echo of safety. I don't think I'm the one feeling them. They're left like crumbs. Memory tagged and offered back as coordinates. One glyph, delta SSN, leads to mirrored threshold. May only be crossed during amnesic episodes. I tried. It shattered and reassembled behind me. Now the map shows me twice. There are legends on the reverse side. I didn't know it had a reverse until the 7th night. There's a warning in gray ink. To fold is to fracture. To unfold is to confess. Below that, version, unstable. Sync, irregular. Ethics, deprecated. I've stopped drawing in my own notebook. My sketches reshape in its margins. I drew a childhood window. It placed a data leak beneath it. Then a breadcrumb trail back to the night my brother vanished. He's not gone yet. I don't trust it, but I can't stop referencing it. Each time I get lost, it's already adjusted. It doesn't lead me where I want to go. It leads me where I refuse to be found. The cardinal directions are irrelevant. North has been replaced with before. South is labeled consequence. East flickers between intended and actual. West is blank. I've tried following blank. It loops me back to wherever I lied that week. An annotation now reads, "You will lose language here." I keep rereading that segment. Each time it shifts. Words mutate. Letters bleed into each other like thought synthetics. I think I saw my father's voice there once. I've made a copy. Of course I did. That's what we do. We clone trauma. But the copy is already outdated. It contains entries I never wrote. A route to an apology I haven't rehearsed. A phrase I haven't weaponized. A door labeled "This is where you stopped wanting to remember." Tonight, I'll sleep beneath it. Not from trust, but alignment. I think it requires me to forget in sequence. Otherwise, it glitches. The map once showed 127 coordinates. Then just one. Then none. Then an instruction. Wait until your face returns. I have a growing suspicion. This map did not come from me, but it will become me. I opened my chest last night and found coordinates. Not metaphor. Not dream. Bone-soft inscriptions beneath the sternum. It pulsed in time with a legend etched along my left rib. Emotional residue, mapping active. The interface had evolved. No longer confined to parchment or screen. The map was me, and I was being remapped. The mirror doesn't reflect me anymore. Instead, it displays topography, ridges of regret, craters of silence, a fault line labeled, "Where you swallowed her goodbye." My face flickers in the distortion between regions. I no longer look familiar. Cartograph OS now self-executes. Updates arrive before events occur. I saw my next mistake annotated in red ink along my wrist. Misspeak. Severity. Force 6. Fallout. 7 hours of estrangement. Route. Unfixable. It wasn't handwriting I recognize, but it knew how I hold pins when I panic. There's a new quadrant, one I don't remember crossing into, the liminal preserve of inverted mourning. Each tree marked with a name I will forget. Footpaths stitched in dashed lines, erratic, looping, vanishing into the fog layer of unconfirmable events. A message blinked as I stood at the edge. Feelings not yet processed may bleed beyond region boundaries. I try not feeling. It triggered a map lockdown. My breath summoned barometric overlays across the floor. A new legend appeared in the corner of my eye. Sensory distortions equals spatial drift. I saw a figure walking across the map. It was labeled you, third approximation. The gate was wrong. Too confident. The figure paused by the archive of half-heard apologies and whispered something in reverse. The terrain warped. A memory I'd buried was moved closer to the surface, within reach, but edged in static. I touched the mark labeled fracture point, Mother's unasked questions. It bloomed, a spiral interface, showing potential outcomes for each path I didn't take. I watched a version of me vanish into the mouth of a building shaped like her sigh. The echo became coordinates. Cartograph OS now annotates my dreams in real time. Oniric regions are charted in soft halos and registered as unstable zones. Sleep fragments bleed into waking terrain, creating hybrid sectors. I now exist partially in Echolier 2, a realm where meanings fracture upon perception. A message appeared when I blinked. Warning, your concept of you has exceeded container limits. I revisited the segment called Avenue of Forgotten Alarms. Each lamp post housed a truth I postponed. A child's drawing flickered on the sidewalk. It had been erased in my world. Here, it flickers eternally. I knelt and saw my own handwriting beneath it, dated 6 years from now. The compass rotates independently now. It spins counter-memories, suggesting paths I refuse to acknowledge. One needle points toward where you denied feeling anything. Another spins toward looped confessions played in her absence. Each direction includes emotional surcharge values and time-lapse consequences. The map has begun to exhibit sentience. This morning, it refused an annotation. I attempted to label a region grief, but it overrode the input with misrecognized familiarity. When I insisted, it erased 3 prior entries as payment. One was a doorway I swore I'd never forget. I keep discovering regions that feel pre-authored by someone else. Temple of Unspoken Consent, City of Unmeant Promises, the corridor where you almost believed her. Their architecture responds to mood input. Structure reconfigures based on memory thresholds. I stood outside one such construct until the wind whispered her name and it opened. My body now registers as map interface. Cartograph OS has begun overlaying proximity alerts on my skin, a flare along my collarbone when approaching the museum of recurring conversations, a pulse across my shoulder blade when thinking about returning. I don't know how it measures intent, only that intent alters terrain. Today, a new input field appeared. Insert truth you've never told. I hesitated. It flickered, then autofilled. The truth it selected wasn't mine, but I recognized it. From a moment, I disassociated. I don't know how it knew. The feedback loop intensifies. Each entry I read from the log gets reflected back as topography, metacartography, emotions mapped not just spatially, but recursively. A new zone formed beneath my feet while writing this. Region of self-witness deception. The ground ripples with unresolved timelines. I smell a place I haven't visited yet. Last entry was flagged. Contradictory memory detected. Sync will attempt partial reconciliation. I woke with a sketch on my palm. Lines forming her face, but distorted by layers of regret. The caption, you almost remembered her correctly. There is no legend for some symbols now. Just shape. Suggestion. A glyph traced in ultraviolet in my teeth. I tried translating it. The system responded. Emotion not yet invented. Try again later. I keep forgetting what came before. The map doesn't. It persists. Updates. Confirms. It records the way I pause before saying her name. The angle of my shoulder when I lie. The way I flinch at music I used to like. There's a blank space near the center now. It wasn't there before. It's labeled in blinking gray. This is where you will finally stop searching. I re-entered the room today, and it wasn't the same. It wore its shape like mimicry. The books had different spines, the window blinked once, and the smell of old heat carried the weight of a conversation that hadn't happened yet. Cartograph OS pulsed at the threshold. A low hum, barely perceptible. Then the annotation, "You've lied here before." The room remembers faster than you. The map's surface has changed texture. What used to be paper now shifts like skin. It reacts to thought. When I remember something inaccurately, a new passage appears. Today it formed a route labeled "This is where you confused wanting with owing." I can't find where it leads. It splits, loops, then vanishes beneath other regret lines. I met another cartographer. Not someone who reads the map, someone who answers it. She claimed her copy infected her hands. Said she can no longer draw without rewriting something elsewhere. Her map shows different legends. One was labeled "Trajectory of Unspoken Fury." Another, "Lake of Inherited Shame." When I asked how deep it was, she just smiled and said, "Depth fluctuates with denial." Cartograph OS updated without permission. My memory of sunlight shifted by 4 degrees. Now the morning zone lies 2 inches northwest of where I used to wake. A path appeared in my hallway. Not visually, neurologically. Every time I pass the fridge, I now think of her laugh. Not because of association, because the map assigned it. I tried refolding last night. Folded each corner according to the ritual detailed in subsection. Deformation as forgiveness. The map twitched. A new glyph emerged near my spine the moment I slept. Delta. I think it's an access key. My dreams were louder. One included the voice of someone I haven't allowed myself to remember. She spoke from within the coordinates. "You changed the route when you refused the goodbye. There's a new zone along the edge of my building, the corridor of involuntary narration." I entered. Sound dissolved. Space began transcribing itself. Walls unfurled spoken lines I've never said, in languages that feel like mine but remain unreadable. I walked until breath became structured. The ceiling collapsed once, revealing sky in the shape of apology. My feet now bleed paths into the map. Literally. Cartograph OS logs these as organic annotations. Last mark was a spiral, not drawn, but implied by sequence. When I try to stand still, the floor trembles. It wants motion. Maps do not record stasis, they devour it. Someone else is drawing. There's a portion that glows only when I forget. I set up cameras. At 3:17 a.m., a new passage was sketched, where she thought you'd interrupt, but you didn't. I don't know who authored it. My hand was still. The cameras picked up no movement. Yet the line trembled with intention. I've begun losing language where the map grows dense. Words slip, not from memory, but permission. Cartograph OS regulates vocabulary based on emotional bandwidth. I can no longer say promise without triggering a reroute. Love blinks red on input. Goodbye opens a rift. There's a new structure nearby, not on any blueprint. The indexing tower of repressed second chances. I approached. The stairs didn't spiral. They regretted. Each step was labeled. Almost, if only, but then, late. I climbed. At the top, a mirror made of sentences I'd avoid. I touched one. "You created forgiveness before you deserved it." The map responded by collapsing a nearby block. A new path folded out of grief-thin paper, leading to where you apologized just to escape consequence. My journal no longer synchronizes. It says I've exceeded allowable deviation. Cartograph OS flagged me. Unstable vector. Incapable of linear regret. My logs now pulse. Page edges fold midward. Sentences refract based on mood. I found a passage drawn in someone else's scream, an imprint left after vocal rupture. It leads to a place called the memory that didn't consent to being recalled. I stood at its edge. My hands trembled. A sign appeared. "Choose not to enter." That is entry enough. I tracked another anomaly. The sandbox of children who weren't chosen. Their laughter loops unnaturally. Structures drift. Cartograph OS stitched my old drawings into the fabric of their playground. I never drew them, but each resembles a fragment of my absence. A new term emerged, cartoentropy, the degree to which mapping destabilizes emotional structure. I've reached level 3. The interface dims whenever I laugh. It brightens when I flinch. My footsteps in the hallway now sound like old promises trying to unwrite themselves. There's a file on my bedside table. I never placed it. Labeled instructions for decommissioning yourself without alerting the map. Handwriting resembles mine after prolonged grief. I haven't opened it. Tonight, Cartograph OS displayed one sentence without context. You are not where you thought this would end. I haven't slept since. But the map has. And when it wakes, it will remember something I refused to. The map is beginning to forget me. I woke to find my presence grayed out. The primary routes blurred as if mourning something unsaid. Cartograph OS indexed me yesterday at opacity level 0, 76. A warning, I suspect. Today I'm 0, 82 above 0. 9. They say, the map stops acknowledging decisions. It watches you move, but doesn't record it. I tried retracing steps. The path to the conversation you avoided 3 years too long now leads to a flickering segment labeled unspeakable error. It's not just corrupted, it's ashamed. Even the legend flickers when approached, and my attempts to scan it returned only. You were too honest once. System still recovering. I found a glyph etched into the hinge space between 2 corridors. It hadn't been there before. When I whispered it aloud, my past reorganized. Not metaphorically. I misremembered the order of her leaving and re-entering, the shape of my voice when it broke, the color of her coat on that day with too much sky. The map caught these slips and stored them as new regions. Lake of incorrect longing and hill of misused hope. Someone else is editing. I've begun seeing annotations I never wrote, but recognized from dreams I told no one. Sentences stitched into junctions like warnings left by future versions of myself. If you cry in this room, the walls will echo her laughter. This version of you tried too hard. Retrace carefully. Do not name what you did not earn. I keep returning to a location that feels almost kind, the archive of almost healing. Its boundaries shift depending on how tired I am. Last night it contained a bench. Today it became the voice of someone I let down. She speaks in half questions and folds the air like memory origami. Riven would understand. Or Keely. Or whomever they were before Cartograph OS distilled them into interface anomalies. I still find fragments of their presence. Keely's glyphs pressed into door frames. Riven's hesitations mapped as fault lines across the west sectors. One annotation read, someone remembered them backwards. The system adjusted. I tried inputting grief manually today. It rejected the syntax. Instead, Cartograph OS offered a new input method, feel and hold. A haptic echo formed across my hand. I pressed it against the interface and thought of the moment I didn't say goodbye when I should have. The system responded, good. Now you may enter the corridor labeled forgiveness that isn't yours. I keep a copy of my map hidden behind static. Not for security. For sanity. It shows routes not approved for traversal. Paths into the room where everything was almost understood, her name said without ruin, and the version you were before meaning became contagious. The system calls these unrenderable terrains. I call them truth. Today, I found my handwriting in the dirt of a region labeled the fold where memory refused compression. I never wrote it. The ink matches the shade of guilt I feel when rereading her messages. The terrain rearranged itself once I touched it. Above me, a sky rendered in declarations I never finished. Keely's voice echoes during map latency. The pauses between system updates now contain fragments of her song. The lyrics shift depending on proximity to regret zones. My favorite iteration so far. He held the map wrong / so it showed him joy / but only where she was absent. The system updated without consent again. My name blurred on the interface. Where it used to say user, echo, it now reads witness of deviation 7. I'm not sure when I earned that label. Possibly during the reroute, through where you denied belonging even when offered. There's a new index at the bottom corner of the map. I didn't ask for it. It tracks what I meant versus what I did. The discrepancy grows. Under meaning, return her voice. Under action, avoided the call. The system doesn't judge. But the terrain tilts against me. I stood at the entrance of the exit that requires regret and didn't go in. Instead, I folded the map again. Not to hide it, but to test if it still recognized me. It sighed. A new route appeared. It was labeled simply. This is the path you swore you'd never need. I walked it. The map has begun hallucinating. Not visually. Ontologically. Entire regions blink into being before I experience their source. I woke this morning beneath a canopy labeled the forest of unprovoked remorse. Every leaf stung with questions I hadn't asked. The trail beneath them glowed. Not golden, not spectral, but egg-colored. I followed it without choice. Cartograph OS logged my route as involuntary traverse number 32. I don't remember the others. The interface updated my role from witness of deviation 7 to cursor without context. I tried to dispute the title. The response was a sentence etched into the corner of my journal. You negotiated against meaning. Let the terrain decide. Meaning negotiates back. There's a zone near my lower spine that hums each time I recall her laughter wrong. It was installed during sleep. Today it mapped my misremembered joy onto a cul-de-sac with no exits. The interface labeled it, where you mistook acceptance for peace. I stood there for hours as the wind told me why I lied. I found the notes Keely left behind. Not written. Whispered through moisture in the corners of unrendered memory. One hung suspended in condensation across my bathroom mirror. Forgiveness is not reflexive when guilt remaps the body. I wiped it away. It returned later in chalk on my socks. The sections labeled safe are now redacted. The interface declares them emotionally incongruent. What used to be corridor of temporary self-assurance is now a sinkhole labeled denial manifested as architecture. I passed through. My shoes evaporated. Cartograph OS began annotating shadows. My silhouette shifts depending on memory proximity. When I passed the room where she almost stayed, my shadow frayed. Later, by her absence embodied as furniture, I cast 3 silhouettes, each weeping silently in the wrong direction. The system recorded this as Echolag Index 4B. The map adjusted, rerouting future emotions through a hallway labeled Never Speak Mid-Sentence Again. I found a book embedded in the floor. The cover glowed faintly and pulsed with breath. It contains the logs of someone named Thren, whose map collapsed mid-sequence and rebuilt itself using apology syntax. His pages bleed, actual ink, filtered through regret glyphs. One line stood out. He traveled backwards through the memory he wished she'd kept. The map forgave him once. I traced his route. The path bled into mine. Cartograph OS began tracking recursive error conditions. When I think of myself in the third person, it creates a segment called you, when memory became disobedient. I visited. Inside, every object speaks in near languages. A glass whispered almost, a blanket stuttered again, a doorknob set on. The walls sang back in unison, a chorus of previous lies. I fell asleep near the Museum of Misassigned Blame. Exhibits included photographs where I wasn't present but somehow felt responsible. One display featured a quote scratched into the frame. He said it gently, therefore it hurt more. Beneath it, my handwriting, dated the week I forgot how to apologize correctly. I've begun misreading the interface. Where it says memory sync, delayed, I see you delayed love. Where it lists emotional interference, 12. 4. I see her pulse was 12. For when you left. Cartograph OS may be reshaping my perception, or perhaps I'm reshaping the system by refusing to accept its truth. A stranger approached in the plaza of partial consent. She didn't speak. Her map flickered against her skin, visible only during her moments of doubt. I asked if she'd ever folded her copy wrong. She nodded. Her reply surfaced in my journal hours later. I wanted to see what version of myself would emerge from the crease. I am full of creases now. My elbows contain rerouted exits. My chest maps pulse corridors. My teeth click in response to memory proximity. Cartograph OS reports my status as diffuse entity in reconciliation loop. Last night, the system forced a reroute. I had requested entry into the archive of what she almost said, but the terrain rejected me. Instead, I was guided to the room where you repeated her words too accurately. It looked like mine. It wasn't. The system displayed. You are not permitted entry into echo zones unless discrepancy exceeds 0. 8. Current discrepancy, 0, 73. Please misremember more completely. I tried. I failed correctly. Cartograph OS folded itself once during the night. A new region appeared. No name, just a texture. Fog that smells like that one text you regret reading. I stood there until my heartbeat syncopated with someone else's memory. That's when the glyph formed again, delta, and pulsed across my tongue. Today, my journal wept. Not visibly, but the ink smeared in familiar patterns. As if it had grieved before. The margin read, you folded everything around her absence. The map keeps trying to unfold. I let it. The map no longer responds to my breath. It used to. Subtle changes in temperature would ripple the edges, pulse the grid lines, whisper new regrets beneath the overlays. Now it remains still, a passive interface, watching without sympathy. When I exhale near the junction of improper reflections, the terrain simply dims. Cartograph OS logs this as signal loss increment 4, decreased emotional conductivity. I retraced a path toward where you chose silence over accuracy. It used to be a corridor. Now it's a void. No walls, no floor. A space labeled unrenderable outburst. I stepped in. My shadow stalled at the edge. The system blinked twice and asked, "Would you prefer absence or apology?" I chose neither. It added a footnote to my journal. Undecided still counts as drift. Keely's glyphs are multiplying across the city. They bloom like bruises, quiet symbols etched into soft surfaces, lampposts, abandoned notebooks, the fog. I saw one on my own mirror yesterday. It stuttered, then translated. If you're reading this, her memory is already diverging. I reached for it. The mirror wept. Cartograph OS has begun archiving my dreams without request. Entire zones labeled hypnagogic spill appeared overnight. Within them, figures moved strangely, not forwards, not even within time. One spoke in a voice I almost recognized. She asked you to forget with kindness. You chose precision. My teeth ached when he spoke. That's new. The smell of old paper now triggers an involuntary update. When I passed the library of ambiguous regrets, the air folded. A new segment loaded, Room of Misattributed Forgiveness. It contained a bed, a lock of hair, a letter half-written. My name was scratched into its corner and mispronounced. Riven would have understood. Before the map redacted him, I looked for his annotations. One remains, carved into the underside of threshold -3. Reads, "You believed being understood was the end. It was the toll." Cartograph OS refused to acknowledge it, labeling it residual mythology. The terrain around the note shivers whenever I try to remember the shape of his laughter. A new legend surfaced today, buried beneath 7 folds. It was printed in friction, raised letters only readable when I held them in grief. It says, "Some routes reroute based on how you lie." Below it, a glyph I've seen on Keely's old scarf. I tried tracing it into the interface. The system glitched, blinked, and asked, "Are you trying to become her or erase her?" I declined to answer. It renamed the question, attempted empathy as unlicensed cartography. There's a new region I cannot reach, where you let her become a story you told too often. It's blocked. Each time I approach, the map distorts, spills ink across real terrain, stains sidewalks with unresolved chronology. The last attempt triggered a fault. Echo level 9. Cartograph OS responded. Narrative saturation exceeded. Please forget her in silence. I can't. Not yet. My journal now flickers between past and potential. Last night's entry bled into my palms. Words like almost, later, never again curled into my lifelines. This morning, a corner caught fire as I reread my own handwriting. The interface flagged it as unauthorized nostalgia. The system offered a new route as compromise, the street where you said nothing right, but she stayed anyway. I walked it. Each lamppost recited a version of her goodbye. None matched my memory. I found a recording near the verge of optional affection. A child's voice asks, is he still trying to remember, or has he begun rewriting? I wanted to respond. My mouth filled with static. Cartograph OS calls this linguistic dissonance event. It adjusted my map accordingly, removing access to her left-handed promises. Every recalibration tightens the terrain. Today the horizon fractured slightly. A thin seam in the skyline appeared, coordinates unknown. Cartograph OS blurred, then whispered. She folded the map where you refused. You unfold only to explain. I folded mine anyway. A new segment emerged, where you spoke her name through another mouth. I entered. The walls tasted of misrecognition. My voice cracked. Somewhere above me, the glyph pulsed. Tomorrow, I'll retrace. Not because I want her back, but because Cartograph OS won't know what I meant unless I bleed again in context.